Commercialization should be happening at postgraduate level.
Customers are not paying for technology, they're paying for solutions.
To be able to provide blended financing facilities that our startups can be able to access.
Researchers should not be sitting only at the research institution. We need to break this island. We need to be with industry. They need to be with other startups.
Are we assuming that just because we have 1 billion Africans, that there is already an available market?
Amplifying African tech stories, elevating technical brilliance. This is the Geo Habari podcast. You're listening to the Space Ecosystem Playbook. To support the show, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy the episode, leave us a rating or review. It helps bring visibility to the podcast. Africa's entrepreneurial landscape is not just vibrant, it's essential, creating jobs, driving innovation, and shaping the future of our economies. At the heart of this growth are leaders who empower founders and strengthen startup ecosystems. Today, we're joined by two such leaders. Our first panelist is Agnes Tsuma. Agnes Tsuma is passionate about mentoring founders, designing programs that scale impact, and helping turn bold ideas into sustainable businesses. Whether guiding a founder through their first pitch or shaping policies to support innovation hubs, her mission is clear: to empower entrepreneurs to build the future. Agnes is an expert at the Joint Innovation Facility at the African-European Innovation Bridge. Our second panelist is Ian Lorenzen, who is the Executive Director and Partner at GrowthAfrica. Ian brings over 20 years of African experience. He has dedicated his career to supporting entrepreneurs, convening ecosystems, and building partnerships that foster innovation and create employment opportunities across the continent. His entrepreneurial spirit and thought leadership have made him a key voice in Africa's startup space. Together, they bring complementary perspectives on how to empower entrepreneurs and scale impact across the continent. Allow me to welcome today's panel that is pushing Africa's entrepreneurial landscape forward. Over to you, Charles.
So welcome to the fifth edition. Today, I welcome two leading lights in the innovation ecosystem. They have been playing different roles. Agnes Tsuma and Ian Lorenzen, thanks for joining us for this important conversation. The objective of that discussion is to explore ideas on how to build a thriving indigenous space ecosystem for Kenya and, of course, by extension, Africa, by taking lessons again from the other sectors. And the discussion will focus on majorly your experiences in your diverse capacities as you continue to serve the innovation sector, and how that contributes to building vibrant ecosystem. On this episode, we'll be exploring the role of funding in driving innovation within the sector. So I will go right into the conversation. So I like to begin the conversation by getting insights about your younger self. Usually that does not get into the resume. And I like hearing how you found yourself where you are at. When you were 20 or you were even much younger, did you see yourself being in the role where you are at? And I begin with ladies first, Agnes.
Thanks, Charles. Very interesting question. I've never had to do this before, so I did not expect this, of course. But to be honest, I never saw myself here. I never saw myself deep into the innovation ecosystem. Just to say, I have a finance background. I did accounting and finance. I have done 8 years in the finance space, but something always thrilled me. I think I got tired of the routine, and I started venturing into the research space and innovation space. I would say it was out of own will, volunteering to support researchers with their monies. I was simply doing grants management by own will. And that is how I found myself in that space. So I worked in the university for 12 years, and out of the 12 years, the last 3 years, I was busy working with researchers and innovators and running around the ecosystem back down the coast in Kenya. So that is where the journey of innovation for me started, when I started working with researchers.
How did you find yourself in finance?
Yeah, so I had two inclinations. First, of course, was I did accounting, commerce as a subject in high school. But I think I was really looking up to myself becoming a pharmacist. Funny thing, it never happened. Don't ask me why. But then after high school, I think I got admission to a private university. I don't think I even saw my admission to the public university. I don't remember. I think I was very deliberate to choose the private university, and I went and did my accounting program for undergraduate. And after that, I started with a sales job because I needed to do something, even as I get to land my dream job, as I thought. Worked in a bank, then worked in a hospital, a chain of hospitals. There I started my accounting journey. And after that, I landed in the university. Grew from a mere clerk doing accounts assistant jobs, cashier work. I grew all the way to the last level of finance department. I did final accounts. I ended up running the budget for the university. And that is how I ended up managing the grants, because I started managing research funds. Yeah.
Interesting. Ian, your younger
Yeah, I
self.
was about to say, who says this isn't my young self? But yes, we should be careful with ageism, so you're not hinting too much.
Mm.
And yeah, so I think I had probably had a bit of a weird journey, because I think until I joined university, I always thought I was going to work in Denmark. I was very Danish, very narrow-minded in many ways, and I think I had a little bit of an eye opener, and I really thank a lot the student organization called ISEC that really took me out and gave me much wider perspective.
Mm.
And also probably was the first encounter I had with entrepreneurship. And then as I then ventured more into this, and I was part of a team that tried to build a business while studying, which is not a good recipe. So that wasn't really working out very well, mostly on my studies. And then I think after then finishing, I got the opportunity to join a .com startup, Swedish. Those were the days where there was no revenue model, but there was a lot of funding being poured into things that might have a revenue and a profit eventually. And as that was kind of getting into a point where the funding was drying up and there were some rough questions being asked around where's that revenue, that money going to come from, I could see this is not going the right direction. So I opted to go on a journey that took me to Uganda in 2000, which then was the first encounter I had with Africa and really got me settled here. I never thought that was going to be the place. I always thought I was going to end up in Latin America. Africa was not the thing that I thought was going to be my anchor point, but that's really what it's been. And then I think with that, a number of entrepreneurial opportunities, and generally, if you thrive with innovation entrepreneurship, this is definitely the place to be. So I think that's why this is very much home. Yeah.
A curious question. You talked about, Ian, you talked about you trying to innovate or to start business and again, it was not seeming to work out. And we've had scenarios where you had the likes of Steve Jobs making or creating businesses when they're in university. I've always had the question in terms of when is the best time to start innovating?
Yeah.
When would
I
you
don't,
say
I don't think there's
the
a
best
best
time?
time. I think starting as early as possible would be my thing. I think it's more just to have the sobering moment that it's unlikely you'll succeed the first as two times. You could also say with that, the sooner you start, the sooner you succeed. And I think that's perhaps also where there's a bit of luck. I think it's a lot harder for young people, especially out of university, to start here. in terms of resourcing and everything that goes into being successful. So I think as long as we are very honest and have these conversations around when do we expect our talent to succeed, because that's not the same as when they start. And I think we also need to just accept that the global statistics is that you need to fail a couple of times. And I think the global statistics is that the most successful entrepreneurs are in their early mid 40s. If we can bring that 5 or 8 or 10 years down, that'd be phenomenal. But I dare the thinking that a graduate out of an African average university can go out at the age of 23 and create a booming big business. I think that's perhaps where we will differ. I don't think that's going to be so likely. Not to say that it's not possible, but it's going to be a very rare case for a lot of obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring Agnes in. You, again, still on the age demographic. Given that you've done a bit of engagement with the innovation ecosystem, supporting them, where do you have a lot of success? Is it the 20s? Is it the 30s? Is it the 40s? Or is it the 50s? Maybe or even the 60s?
I would say it's all in between there. You cannot be sure, and I don't know if there's a study that has been conducted. I think I'm getting ideas here. But honestly, as Ian has just mentioned, as you grow, you get this maturity in you, and you get that experience. So I would say honestly, if you're to look at say a case example of which startup that has been there and has failed and they're back up, I'm forgetting the name, they would tell you, check with me. If you'd have checked with me 5 years ago, I was so sure I'm making it. But here I am 5 years down the line, 3 years down the line, and I feel like now I'm starting. Now I have my eyes open. I've figured out. I'm keen on my team. I'm keen on this and that. I'm keen to even assess the VC, the angel investor. Back then, there was that excitement. I'm getting money. Oh, it's coming and all that. So it goes with age, definitely. But beyond age, exposure is also another aspect. You could get exposed earlier in your life, such that then you get to gather these learnings earlier, and you're able to actually hop onto the journey, and you move on and you get on well. And there are those who would get you just find yourself with opportunities, and you go ahead and take up these opportunities without a lot of maturity and exposure and experience, and before you know it, you're back down there with nothing.
I think we've seen a shift where if you'd asked me 10, 15 years ago, we saw a lot more business that would cling on to their business and not let it die because that was so much their identity, and failure was absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah.
I think we've definitely moved that. So now people accept that it's done, it's a deal. And there's an opportunity, a next opportunity where I think in the past this was the one opportunity I had. And if it messes go down, I won't have it again. I think that things have changed now. Also, entrepreneurs who have failed are not looked as they're not in demand. They aren't maybe not in demand, but they're looked at as resources that clearly have something to bring, which is definitely different from what it was 10 years ago.
But it brings another perspective, and where again, looking at the ecosystem about raising funds, where we've had companies that have raised substantial amounts in terms of from the VCs. Some seem not to be doing very well. Some seem to be struggling. And in fact, there's also this nation that has been put across, like people are also they've become funding junkies, where they jump from one fund to the other and then they change the names. I don't know, maybe Agnes, if you go first and then Ian. Is that a common phenomenon in the market? Will be concerned?
Well, it is common, yes, as you say, but I think I'm seeing a different shift in terms of the funder's perspective, this other side, and now being very keen to try and establish and ensure that whoever they are bringing on board is not just here for the funding and they go. There's a whole conversation around sustainability. Most of these startups would rush for this funding, try to align to whatever the funder wants, and that is where the problem starts. You don't go in for what exactly is your core business, but you try to realign your core business to fit into what the funder is looking for, and you find yourself dropping off after the funding period because that was not your initial goal. That is not what I would say your niche area probably, and so that has been happening for a while. But I think from what I'm seeing, having engaged with quite a number of funders of late through our design phase, a lot of them are now trying to ensure that, one, at their design point, they try to address ecosystem needs and are very clear on a niche and try to target that niche and address the funding need. But on the other hand, even as they target and attract these startups, they are keen to do the assessment and due diligence to ensure that this is a startup that is ready to go the long haul beyond the funding that we provide, and they are clear to even articulate what is their plan beyond this fund. And on the other end also, as a funder, ensuring that there is sustainability and there's continuity. So it's just not people coming together to do a project and run off, but it's more of how do we ensure they are scaling their solution to be able to grow. So growth and sustainability. I see Ian is burning to say something.
And I was on
Is that clear?
You do funding, and we had an earlier conversation where you say sometimes the funding comes with its own guidance. How easy is it to come up with your own idea, like Agnes is saying, and get funding? How does that work?
Yeah, I think from there's the funding that goes to the entrepreneurs and building their businesses. And I think we've, for a long time, a too long time, had the sense that success was how much money do I raise? And I think that also then builds, unfortunately, the narrative that then you'll rise and shine and you're going to burn as well afterwards, because that was the model that you created, was that if you just got money was success. And if you had money, you could grow. That also means if you're then not able to fulfill that, then clearly you failed. And I think that's a bit, and I think we have, and that's always been the case, we have people who grow silently and that's their model. And I always think that this is the most amazing business, the ones that doesn't need to advertise their success. They know they're successful, and they're successful by the market, not by the fact that they are published as much as possible or have raised as much money as possible. And also often some of these guys, they just know how to sell. And sometimes we know that we have entrepreneurs who, well, instead of selling a little bit harder, it's easier to raise money. And maybe we need to put a little bit more focus on that sales. And we look at it, we hardly have any, and this is also a bit of reflection for myself, we have an idea or two around how can we bring perhaps sales into some of these programs that we're doing? Because every funder is very focused on doing pitch events and demo days and all of that. I'm yet to see a single funder that is looking at sales. And it would seem logically that we should focus, how do I get to market? How do I get my products to my customer? How do I drive sales? If I can drive sales, I'm more investment ready, I'm more investable. Maybe I don't even need the investment, but we're so focused on putting the shine up on a podium and getting some good publicity. And I think that's part of what we need to address a little bit. What is that we're looking for here? Is it growth and impact? Or is it that publicity in that space where numbers on the fundraising side is success as opposed to sales, for example? And then if you then were asking me as an entrepreneur support organization, so can we pitch our own ideas and projects to funders? I think that's what this year for me was to try and find out, to see whether we could build some of these concept notes and take them to funders and see, is there an appetite for a bottom-up approach where we are the ones taking the ideas and what we see are the needs on the ground. And we know that funders can accommodate to some extent. They have also procurement rules and the likes for what they can and cannot do. But I think there is a need for us to see whether we could have a different space. And I think Agnes rightly said the word co-create, and I kind of love it, but I often feel that it's not co-creation, it's more co-validation, because the ideas have already been created often. So at the point we come in, I'm not creating, I'm sorry, I'm validating, I can maybe refine, but the creation has already happened. And that's just a little bit of wordplay, but I think that's where we're at.
I want to bring Agnes in because you worked both, Eugenie, you worked for government, the innovation agency.
Yeah.
And then you transitioned into development partner. So where you are giving, you are supposed to be receiving on one end, and then you are essentially guiding that conversation. Is Ian correct, or do you have a different perspective?
So first, I just need to correct. At least I came into GIZ when it was just starting, and all they had was, this is what we want to focus on. It's very clear it's climate. It's very clear it's digital innovations. It's very clear it's Africa, Europe, Africa, Africa. We are bridging that gap, okay? But beyond that, we have done everything from scratch through engagements with different stakeholders across all, even innovators, just asking to understand, is this realistic? Is this that? And that is why we're even running this current call to also just see, is it going to make sense? Are there areas we need to correct? Is this going to be able to serve the purpose to actually be able to bridge that gap that we're trying to bridge? And I know there are circumstances where a funder actually already knows what they want, they have everything figured out, and probably it's a validation instead of a co-creation, as you have mentioned. That I know has happened. But having said that, now that we are talking about funding, before I answer your question, Charles, and I think you will just have to come back on that one, I actually learned just the other day, I will not mention the bank. So one thing that is not happening currently in the country now with regards to Kenya is traditional banks stepping in to work together with philanthropy organizations and other entities that are providing funding to be able to provide blended financing facilities that our startups can be able to access. They literally are shying away. So I know of a bank that has been holding money for some time now, trying to get local banks to step up and work together to give funding to our startups. And our local banks are not willing. So you see, that's another side of the coin that we also need to address if we are really going to get funding to our startups and it can actually be able to help. Because yes, we talk about, yes, funding is there and all that, but it will not always be grants. So now we need to think beyond these grants and start preparing them to be able to even become bankable by the local banks. And we can only do that if they come in and they work together with these other development partners who are willing to put in funding in that mechanism. So just to say that there is this, maybe this is something you need to try and feature, and we bring these people on the table and have this conversation, because the funding is there, but if we don't have forthcoming financial institutions to step up and take up this opportunity and work with the startups and the ESOs to be able to facilitate this funding and create that channel, then we are losing out. Yeah. You were asking how it was working while I was in Kenya and how it's working on this other end. Well, yes, in Kenya, while I was in Kenya, we were on the receiving end. Not so good place to be, but I would say we were an enabling institution. We were working to create an enabling environment in the country from an innovation ecosystem perspective. And I would say we don't have to wait for government to fund every single component of it. As you're building an ecosystem, you anticipate and expect that different ecosystem players will plug in and work together towards journeying and enhancing that ecosystem. And that is why, as Kenya, there was a master plan that was put in place, and the master plan was supposed to bring together the different ecosystem players. And for that reason, at least we were able to rally around the different key players who were able to plug in on their different capacities and say, I will handle the commercialization. I will handle the market systems component. I will handle the education component. I will handle infrastructure. So different players coming in, and Kenya playing the role of coordinating and bringing together the different players. It also broke silos because we were able to see partners come together and collaborate to drive one single agenda that is for government, but at the same time, it is achieving their own objectives as entities. Well, on the other end now, on the development sector side then, is to ensure that we are well plugged into the ecosystem to be able to step in where we see it's a niche, it's a stronger side, for instance, at the UK government side, and now within the EU and the German government side, which I wouldn't really be able to speak to, very, very new, but just to say that I see the entities are quite strong, are quite deliberate and intentional to be within the areas that they are strong and are able to facilitate support as much as possible, as well as ensuring that they meet their objectives. I am not speaking for any government, just to be very clear about this, but just saying that based on my experience for the past few years and how it's been working, I see that has been working well. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but we see more and more other entities coming into the space. A case in example is the Kenya Innovation Funders Forum. Yeah, this is bringing together different parties, partners, development partners, governments, who have different agendas to come in and contribute to the innovation ecosystem in the country. And I have seen that already happening in other countries as well. Other countries trying to learn from this experience and how they can be able to adopt that. So for me, it's one way Kenya has managed to bring together the different partners, break silos, reduce, I would say, utilizing resources on activities that have already been implemented. Because then now I know the USAID or the US government is supporting this aspect. I know UK is supporting this aspect. I know the Danish, the Denmark is supporting this aspect. So at least I know I don't have to sit and reinvent the wheel. I can probably just check in with them and see where are the gaps, and I go ahead and do something different. Yeah.
I want to bring in, you mentioned something about local funding and the risk associated with that. And I wanted to hear from Ian in terms of, given that you've been looking for funding for startups and incubating them as well, is it that our innovators are very risky? Is it that we cannot, even when Agnes was talking about blended funding, is it that we cannot raise our own local funding to be able to support the innovators? Is there something that is missing?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is something missing. And I'm going to say it's not the missing middle, it's the missing first half. And it's definitely, it's a sense of where traditional money would sit, and also the fact that they've been sense around what's secure in terms of investing or putting money into. We've always had classes where money was perceived to be safe and the returns were good. So you'd almost invest in startups only if you're very idealistic or you thought that you could create a new unicorn, which we would probably just a little bit away from seeing. So I think there definitely is a risk profile and profile of that. And then I think, honestly speaking, I don't think we've been very good at finding ways in which we could aggregate money. So where we say a number of us don't have the kind of money that we perhaps perceive ourselves to be in a position to be angel investors.
Yeah.
But perhaps if we change that perception around that, if there's enough of us and we can pool our money, then angels doesn't talk about how big an angel you need to have. If I have wings that are like a sparrow, maybe there's enough that I can go somewhere. If we just could find different mechanisms. And I think that's also where IT and digital should be able to help us that we could convene 100 within a network and we build our own small micro fund that we build out on, where we don't need to be angels in the traditional sense, where you probably can lift a deal if you're 10 people or less.
Yeah.
And where most of us would say we don't have that kind of finance capabilities, but I'd love to do something. I think there are different ways, but we're not being creative enough. And then I think I'm very confident if we had more local money, that local money can be leveraged to some softer or more concessional money from outside who want to help us catalyze this. So if I, together with Agnes and yourself and 100 other people, could set up such a micro fund, I'm sure that we will be able to get a funder or two say, well, this is interesting. We will be able to take some risk or some other capital in that will prove that this model is working, because we need that showcase. And this could be one of the ideas. And this is not rocket science. I mean, for real, we just need to get it done. And perhaps some of it is to say, use forums like yours to say, who want to be in? Who is the other 97 that we need to be able to get
Mhm.
started?
It's interesting because one of the thoughts that I've always had, given the example of Nairobi, I always see buildings coming up. And I'm always like, I don't think it is the money issue. And I like what you're raising here in terms of the microphone. Maybe we can bring Agnes here. Is it that the mechanism lack for us to be able to pull resources into one pool because I believe one of the other issues is in terms of the confidence of the market to be, because they don't know about these innovations. So you don't want to put your money into an innovation that you have no idea how it runs. Giving the example like for fintech, what are your thoughts in terms of pooling? Do we have mechanisms in place?
I feel like I am not so confident we have the mechanisms. Probably that is the first half that Ian is talking about. Because you would find that yes, we have angel investors, we have individual VC companies existing, but if we are pulling together a huge pool, where is this managed? How is this going to happen? Who is going to be responsible? And all these questions, and that is why you see certain entities would be keen to be attaching the funding to an existing financial institution because they already have a whole system in place, a mechanism. But of course, the other question that I popped up to these people was, but there are people, funders, who are managing funds. Why not try to work with them? Does it have to be a financial institution? So maybe it's a conversation around demystifying this whole issue around innovations and the startups and the startup ecosystem, one, and also helping them understand, educating them around this whole aspect of the startup ecosystem and what it means. I know there are already efforts around working with people who are willing and ready to put money into pools of funds, pull together funds. I know that is happening, but I feel there's a different components that we are leaving out, and these are the fund managers. Maybe Ian, you can correct me, maybe this is already happening because they would play a critical role. As much as there are people who would be willing to put in money, they need to have the confidence that the fund managers would be able to execute and manage the fund, make it a rotating a fund existing and be able to continue working for the longest period ever. People would always be ambitious about that. And then, of course, on the other end is how sure are we of the pipeline? Okay. And of course, now this we go back to the ESOs. They know these startups, they've worked with them, they know those that are probably ready, and how do we make them solid such that the investors would have that confidence. So there are different components here that would make the system that you're calling a system, Charles. And where do we feel like we need to put a little bit more effort to work towards making this whole system work, so that then maybe the pool of funds can actually happen. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think it's discussion in progress. Of course, it now discussing about space, and in fact, the pockets become even much smaller because it's not even understood. And I would want to hear your comments later in terms of how do we get funds into the tech spaces that are emerging. I wanted to hear from Ian. I recently came across a comment that went like, Africa has a booming population, so it must be a huge market someday, right? Then it went on to say, population alone doesn't create a market. What matters is what people can afford to buy. Do you agree? And what is your take on that? Are we assuming that just because we have 1 billion Africans, that there is already an available market?
I mean, a number of people do not say there's a market, so yes, and I think we've seen that over and over again. And there was some information this morning, which was essentially an interesting map of Africa that was looking at if you took part of Africa and took geographically took an area that would be 250 million people. It was covering 70 or 80% of Africa. And then you said, well, that's the same as available in Nigeria alone. And to be able to scale then across, I think this was probably 35 or 40 markets, as opposed to just getting yourself right in one market, is a hell of a difference. So there's a reason why Nigeria, in many ways, that way around, will have some business that will succeed simply because there is a more one location, one place that you could do this. So we need to talk about income levels. Also, middle class African is not a middle class European. So we also need to use that even that word is not the same. So all of that and what is that we're buying, what is that we're looking for is vastly different. I'd say also the difference between the big city here and even your secondary or third-tier cities are vastly bigger than if you go to Europe. The difference between the capital city and the next two tiers of cities is perhaps not less. People aspire, they buy relatively the same thing. That's vastly different here. So I think we need to have, and that's also why the word addressable market is perhaps much better. And I think we should be excited about potential. And I think we need as Africa to sell potential. That's not to be blind about the fact of what is the difference between potential, which speaks about a future, and what we have right now. But I believe in potential. And that's what entrepreneurship is about as well, is that we have a bright future ahead of us, and we're going to address what is there now, and then we're going to build going forward for what is going to come. But the fact that we have a booming young population is in itself not a guarantee. And if people don't have jobs, they don't have purchasing power, and then we're there. That's also why job creation has to be the number one criteria in terms of building the growth and the wealth we want. If people have money, they can buy service, they can buy products, they can help our business, and then we'll grow. But if people are not having jobs, so they're underemployed, it won't happen. It's as simple as that.
I know, Agnes, you'll also want to comment on the same. And as you comment on that, I also wanted to bring in the dimension. Ian mentioned about potential. And I know in different conversations where we've met with yourselves, where we're discussing about turning research to innovations and to go to market. And sometimes you feel like there's this huge disconnect. And I know there's some work that is being done or the conversations that are happening. Are we using the potential that is in our academic institutions to produce go-to-market solutions or products?
Well, just starting with the notion around the population and equating it to just how much you can make and sell and all for most startups and most entrepreneurs, it's really, I would say it's a mistake. And I think Ian has really elaborated that very well. Most of the startups always make that assumption. It's a very wrong assumption, of course. And especially now, even just thinking about a product that you're designing in Kenya and you're thinking it might be very useful in South Sudan, maybe not, you know. So there's so many factors in play, and probably those are some of the areas all startups definitely would want to rethink and reconsider as they think about the market potential for their products and services. But having said that, going back to your question again, and whether we are fully utilizing the potential and the capacity of the higher education institutions. If you checked with me 4 or 5 years back, I would say no. I would say no. Not so much is happening. And even today, I still feel like there's a lot of what they imagine is a problem and the reality on the ground. A number of institutions are now taking the initiative to make it quite customer focused, very need based, as opposed to what they imagine and write a paper, then figure out, okay, where can I go with this paper? Yes, they're now appreciating it goes beyond publications. And there is an opportunity to commercialize or make it at least a public good, okay, or service. But now they start to appreciate the fact that before you even sit to do this research work, what are you trying to address? What challenge are you trying to address? And from your question again, it's not about somebody being able to afford, but what pain point are you addressing? Because the moment you're addressing a pain point, I will pay for it because it is going to address my pain point. And so what challenge are you solving in the community? And now going back to the community and trying to address those challenges. And hey, that is how you're actually doing socioeconomic development anyway. So now universities have started looking at it from that perspective. Yes, we are there has been entrepreneurship, but Is it really entrepreneurship we are learning in the institute? We are training institutions. What approach should they take when they talk about entrepreneurship? Because there's a whole different idea of entrepreneurship in academia versus what is actually happening out here. And so stepping out of, I usually say we are busting that bubble slowly, one institution after another. When we tell them, you think you're doing entrepreneurship, step out here and see what actual entrepreneurship is. And by itself, it's just changing the mindset. So I would say a lot of mindset shift has happened with academia to actually start seeing commercialization happen, but not so much as it should. But I would say it's a step in the right direction. And it goes beyond a researcher to the institution itself, being able to embrace and appreciate. They need to walk away from normal curricula, standard curricula running through a program all the way, and bringing in industry to be able to address challenges. Because I mean, commercialization should be happening at postgraduate level. And for postgraduate level, before you sit to write your research, you should have engaged industry to know what exactly you're writing about. So there's that shift happening. I wouldn't say it's happening, wow, it's a wow effect right now, but it started happening. And a lot of engagements happening with industry, at least in Kenya. And I believe we will be seeing a very huge shift in another 5 years. It's not going to happen today. Another 5 years, to be honest, is when we'll start seeing an actual shift and actual commercialization. I have been part of a process for research commercialization through Kenya and up until when I was in RISA. And I can assure you, out of all the cohorts that have been trained, let me tell you, you can be able to see the difference. There was only one gentleman who was not from a research-based space who has actually been able to scale. He is reporting impact now, and that was 3 years back. He's now reporting impact. But go and check with researchers, lecturers who have been taken through the commercialization process. We are not yet there. Yes, they have attracted funding, but have they actually been able to commercialize? And probably we'll end up asking ourselves, what do we really mean by commercialize? Maybe we are calling it a very big name, getting this product to the market, but is it actually penetrating the market? Are they actually managing to scale? Is the product staying in the market and surviving in the market? So there are very many aspects to this, but just to say, I'm not dimming the light, it's good. At least they are appreciating. And one other aspect I always kept saying is, what if we are pushing them to become startups and all we need to see is how we support them to probably explore joint venture or a license pathway? What are these other pathways that could be explored? And now I know it is happening. They are trying to explore these, trying to bring in a co-founder component, because they are not in, they don't have that business DNA. I'm sorry to say this in them. And you've been in mainstream university doing your lecturing work, and here you are, this is a good opportunity and you're excited. But will you be able to stay in it for 10, 15 years? No. So they are looking at a co-founder component. It's happening now. I'm not so sure, I cannot report and say how far they have gone, but I know that is an approach they have taken up to try and see how they can actually eventually commercialize, working with a co-founder component now to match with a researcher.
Great. Ian, in your pipeline of innovators, how much are you using research from the universities? Are there patterns that you're getting from the universities, if any? I'm assuming you also get a blend between the young and how is the education helping them to be able to identify like the pain points so that now even as they come with technology, or are they beginning from the technology and then wondering where to apply it for? How is that landscape?
I'm probably sitting in a little bit of a space where, for me, you're an entrepreneur, you're not an entrepreneur. I don't think it's something we can train, to be very honest. I think we can give people entrepreneurial skills. And I think we perhaps also need to have a little bit of conversation around, I think there are people that they're born entrepreneurs. And then I think there's some people who could become co-founders. And they're not real entrepreneurs, but they're a little bit there. But we never really figure out how do we place them. These are the guys who probably wouldn't start the business, but they're a great co-founder. They would join a team, they'll be part of it, and they'll build and drive it. And then there's innovators. And I think it also comes back, and if I have to be a little bit harsh, I think traditionally in academia and in school, we've been focusing on entrepreneurship training. I hardly see a single course in innovation. And I think it speaks a little bit that these are not the same thing, but we tend to think that they're the same thing, and they're not. And I think we should teach every single young person innovation. That's a tool, it's a mindset. And I think if we have that, we'll see a lot of people who 10, 20 years later, when they're ready, that seed that we planted comes to fruition. We'll see that start coming out. And they will, maybe if not starting their own business, they'll be more likely to be a co-founder. And a lot of our researchers, and I think it was great. I was in an event sitting on a panel last week, and it was great to see there was a lot younger researchers, was really promising. So we are seeing an age shift, which was needed. We saw a lot of female research was phenomenal as well. So I think things are really happening. What I don't think is happening enough is definitely how do we break that silo? What Agnes is also sharing about, that we researchers should not be sitting only at the research institution. We need to break the silo. We need to be with industry. They need to be with us. They need to be with other startups that can commercialize the innovation, so that those who don't have or want to bring it to market, then the vehicles are other startups or other businesses. And also that there's no shyness, should be no shyness, that corporate should also be there, that we should have our big corporates go and build that. I mean, it's sad to see that we have certain industries where 90+% of the innovation is bought outside. We don't innovate it here. So when we're looking at ingredients and likes, we're not innovating it here, which we should. So how do we build that out? But it also is to make sure that we have the research and scientists come out, meet us. I don't have a lot of IP or a lot of things that sit where I am. And it's probably because the scientists themselves often are not great entrepreneurs. That means unless I have a matchmaking between the business I work with and the scientists, or space in which we can then bring them together, and we should have, ideally we should have matchmaking or speed dating events or whatever we want to call it, where we get these meetups. Well, we also can start training the investors way ahead of time and say, what is research-based innovation? Because none of them, or most of them, would have no clue. So let's even say whether we get some of these innovations to get to be ready. Shocker. I think it's going to be that a lot of the investors will not know or not be ready. They will think that this is another layer of risk. And then I think lastly, we need to flip the coin so that our research need to, as Agnes said, it need to be market driven. Right now, and for the longest time, researchers have been supply driven, which means you can sit for 20 years and study a specific type of maize that can do something, but where there's a market for it. Also because the way that we measured success was the number of publications. It was not relevance or market value or market relevance or impact. That needs to change. But that's a whole system that needs to change.
Interesting, because I like the idea of saying sometimes you look at how a publication has been cited multiple times, but sometimes we don't get to the point where we look at how that idea has been implemented on the ground. And still on the issues about how we translate research into go-to-market product. There's something, Agnes, you mentioned previously when you're working on working with Kenya. And the first time I went for the Kenya Innovation Agency event, I was surprised by the number of the private sector players that were in that meeting. And I found that it was different in terms of how the things were being done. Is that the way government should work? Are we missing out something by not engaging? And Ian talked about having the corporates in the room. And when you're talking about it, you talk about the streams where you are inviting the different partners. Can you potentially share about that experience and how that has helped Kenya be able to move the needle?
So industry is the backbone of any economy, if I may say. And if we are going to get products to get to the market, we need to have industry in the room. So it has always been an agenda. And even to date, in any space I find myself, I always ask, so who is in the room? Are we talking to ourselves? because that has been the problem, unfortunately, with government. Sitting in the room, speaking to different departments of different ministries, talking to yourselves. But who is listening? Who is out there? Who is going to take this word and is going to help you implement? Because you cannot do it alone, right? And so that was an agenda in Kenya, to always get the right people in the room if you want to get your agenda move and advance. And so that was an objective across all the different aspects within Kenya, not just the commercialization component, for even the different other aspects within the agency that we were trying to achieve. Of course, it wasn't perfect. If you ask me, Kenya Innovation Week, we would achieve getting participation from industry, but it has been a challenge for some time with the SEAL Summit, the Commercialization of Entrepreneurial Innovation Institutions Leaders Summit. We are bringing together academia, but they still talk to themselves if they don't have industry in the room, right? But of late, I see the agency has been able to bring in at least some financial institutions, banks, insurance companies. Already, that is progress, and some companies have been able to come in and join in that conversation. And now I think the next step is unlocking and getting these researchers to work together with industry. Because it's one thing for us to sit in an event, discuss, talk, and go, and continue conducting our research there, you know. But I must say there are universities that are actually working very well with private sector. There are universities that are working well with private sector, and it's just how do we also support the rest of the institutions to join this bandwagon and do this thing, you know. And I also have to appreciate there are universities that are actually working with ESOs, trying to bring together startups with students. Okay. I'm not so sure how that is going on so far. I know Circle Innovation has been doing something with KCA, and I'm not so sure whether it's Daystar or Riara University, but that has been happening. And I'm keen to also follow and see how is that coming along. But I'm just keen to speak a little bit about the space sector. I was impressed with what I saw in Rwanda, with how the ESO Vestavela was able to support the startups. And it also was an awakening for me to actually understand what is this that somebody would innovate in the space sector, you know, and be able to scale. I took interest in a specific startup and engaged with this startup, and I tried to get them funding because I felt like they're doing something brilliant, which is supporting small scale farmers. But no one would even imagine that you could actually innovate and do something within the space sector. So yeah, it's another whole new environment I have been for the past 2 years, and I've really appreciated. But yeah, those would be my comments for now.
Interesting, because part of the conversation that we're having now is also trying to see, and in the subsequent editions, where we start looking at the opportunities, because sometimes we've been accused of, oh, we can't invest in space, whereas we still have problems on the ground. And whereas space helps address issues that are on the ground.
Yes.
But I don't want to get into that conversation. I want to
Maybe let's do that, actually.
because we will circle back to that, because maybe you can put in a comment here.
Yeah, I mean, I've shared this with you before. I think space has a communication problem, because when you say space to me, I'm already on a rocket on the way to moon, and I think that's literally what it is. A little bit the trouble we have is we almost need to find a way to communicate a little bit different, at least until we get to that point. So I think that's an area we need to do ourselves a disfavor, or perhaps have space and then build a sub theme, say space something sub theme. So we kind of get it back to, oh, okay, we talk about data analytics. I get that. We're not talking about rockets. The visuals we need to have is perhaps something that speaks to satellites and data as opposed to rockets. So it's a lot of this is a comms piece. And then I think, and this is maybe looping a little bit back, is that I sometimes really miss, and that goes into this research to commercialization space as well. If there was a funder that says, one way to lure this out is to put up a couple of challenges or hackathons. And I think I haven't invented a new word, but a different concept around hackathons where we need to say there is a challenge or an issue, and we think that there is, whether it's a space solution or it's an innovation research solution that we could do. So it could be that there's a corporate that says we want to put this out. The corporate is willing to put in 50%, and the funder says we're willing to put in the other 50, and then see what comes out of that. I haven't seen much or any of that. Space, similarly, I think there's more chance that we'll get something around space where somebody will say, let's put out a challenge, put a challenge fund. We need to build a bit of a different structure, I think. So we're not replicating hackathons or challenge funds the way they used to be, but we're looking at a little bit also if that's the delivery vehicle, but we need to get a little bit into the machine room as to what would work very well. But I think that's what we need to see. And I think we'd be very surprised to see we'll see some amazing things come out. And if we could lure a couple of corporate, a little bit of business money into the room as well, and say you're not paying for the full bill, but if we, as we think we can create value, it's only fair that you contribute, but we're willing to de-risk it a little bit. And once we could showcase X number of great opportunities here, we're on the move. And as well for the space bit, it could be that we say, so back to the investment side, is it, what if there was 100 of us that were willing to put up a small space fund where we put in a little bit of money every month that could go into that one or two startups that we could see in one way or the other. But we also know we don't have big money that we can put aside every month. But if there's enough of us, then it would work. And then lastly, I think this is maybe also something that Agnes rightly said earlier. I believe that there's opportunities in the space of space. I'm not an expert. And what some of these groups would need to rely on is the fact that we would trust that in a group of 100, there will be people who have the skills and the expertise that is needed, rather than the way it works generally. And that's also what I would buy into. I would want to be in a group with like-minded peers who I know knows things. I can bring something, you bring an expertise. Is that collective that really will make this happen? Which also means that we can start building around a collective intelligence in how we do things, which I think is what we're not necessarily seeing elsewhere. Real angel networks operate like that. I think that would be interesting as well if we could test that. What could that look like if we had the minds of 100 people, the networks of 100 people, the customers we could get being 100 people, the validation we could create with 100 people, all of that we're not thinking into a model right now.
Thanks for that. And I'm glad that it is coming from yourselves and the drive for us to work together, because that is what we've been seeking to do, to have the conversation with other sectors. Because I think there is a concept about focusing, and I think I had asked that question, Nadine, focusing on the technology as opposed to the problem, and then working it backwards. And are we making the same mistake here, where we're looking at space as a technology and not looking at the farmer? And I like the idea, Agnes, when you're talking about the farmer, the startup that was working on the farmer. Should we be putting money on the problem, or should we be putting money on the technology? And I see that also in the fintech as well. I don't know, maybe your comments as we now start winding up.
All right. So the money follows the problem. I always say that. Then the technology comes in to make things simpler and easier, accessible, whichever it will be, to ease the burden. But the money will always go where the problem is. So you need to start from where the problem is. Having said that, I feel like even for the space sector as well, we need to look at that approach. And I like the idea that Ian is proposing around, is it a hackathon, a challenge? And one other thing you need to consider, space cannot work alone. Right. You need to loop in another sector that because we are leveraging the technologies to be able to address. So which sector will it be? Is it the blue economy? Is it agriculture? Is it health? Because all those, space plays a role, but you wouldn't actually see that up front right now. Somebody would not see it until you look and engage with these startups and you realize, really. So actually, Earth observation actually addresses this, is able to help this. Before that, I didn't know. So again, and I liked some of the series of workshops you had engaged with your partners were addressing specific sectors and trying to bring together how the space technologies is able to address some of those sectors. So again, space would not really work alone. So you have the opportunity to actually diversify because you get to engage with different sectors. And let's see how this works out. Yeah.
Your comment, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I think customers are not paying for technology; they're paying for solutions.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. And I think we've also been shocked on how some of our so-called technology firms started out with things that were really not great, but they were actually delivering solutions on technologies that was a lot less technological than we thought.
Yeah.
But I think also there we've done ourselves a bit of a disfavor that today the understanding is that everything has to be tech for it to be investable. And perhaps that's a little bit what we need to kind of get back to the reality, which is also what Agnes right for sharing. What's the problem? What's the impact? What is it we're trying to address? If technology can do that, absolutely on point. And sometimes we can overkill with technology, and sometimes technology will evolve as our business grow and we are able to scale and we're able to do things. But
Yeah.
technology for the sake of technology, no. But there will be people who will nerd with technology, and that's the guys that we need to help. So the guys who really know their technology, and we then can help them deploy that best possible because we understand the problem.
But I have still on the same. Now looking at the other side, I want to go back to the US at one point when I think it was JF Kennedy who said we are going to the moon. Not because there was a need to be addressed for going to the moon, but because that vision allowed them to aim for something higher. And sometimes I feel, I don't know whether that is the same feeling that you have. Is it that as sometimes government, we do not aspire to a bigger goal that would allow us to create business that fits into that, and then you will have spin-off? Because for space, we've seen a lot of spin-off. It could be the batteries that allow us to, the portable ones, that allow us to have all these devices. It could be your mattress that you sleep on. Should we also do technology for the sake of doing technology and fund that and create opportunities?
I have a feeling John Kennedy, actually, there must have been a reason. There must have been something that triggered, and they felt like could get a solution up there. Something happened down here that made them feel
Russia went before them, so they wanted to beat Russia. Is that
What's the reason?
so there was a motivation. I mean, and just to say there must be something that will drive you to come up with whatever solution that you're coming up with. Otherwise, then why? You'll always ask yourself, why are you doing this? There must be a reason, whether it's a problem, whether it's for leisure, whether it's out of fascination to just see for the fun of it. There must be a reason behind it. So for me, even for government, there must be a motivation, and it's just that sometimes they lose it with all these many things that are happening within the government and the political
the
space.
government?
But yeah,
There has to
sometimes
be
they
a why.
lose. Yeah, there has to be a why. There has to.
Ian,
Yeah, and I mean, I think government, of course, have the opportunity to be a lot more strategic around seeing areas that are growth areas, opportunities where we as Kenya or different location in Africa can play a role, and where we have opportunities and future opportunities as well, where we, in various ways, well suited to do things, where that is a given type of technology, it's a given service, it's a given human capital that we have. And I think it would be great if we were a bit more strategic around it. And I think sometimes also that we see areas perhaps that are a lot more niche. And how do we capture those? How do we not just follow, but say this is it? And I think in day of AI, we're going to have to be a lot more focused around where is it that jobs can and will be created going forward? Where is it jobs can be sustained? And where is it jobs perhaps not going to be very influenced by AI? Service industries or tourism, AI is not going to disrupt to the same degree as in other places. And and tourism could be a place where there's a lot of job opportunities for young people and where we can upskill them relatively quickly. Yet we may not see, ironically enough, we don't see a lot of innovation or programs or efforts in the tourism industry, which is across the whole of Africa. It's not only here. We could see in Europe and US, there's a lot of food tourism where people literally will travel because they want to go to the best restaurants in the world. What if we decided to say, we are not pretty bad off here? Maybe South Africa will beat us and they have the wine. What if we strategically said, we want to be the capital where people want to come to Africa for great food? Nairobi is the place. There's a space here, nobody else have captured it yet. We could be there. There are opportunities where we don't necessarily need to be the next BPO destination. And I think AI has also shown that BPO probably is very different today what it was a couple of years ago. We thought that was the place we're going to create a lot of jobs. Today is probably the place we want to run away from, at least in the way it was 3 years ago. So also just to keep a little bit these things in mind. So there's a lot of things I think we could do. And what we definitely also need that collective intelligence on where are those opportunities for us.
Thank you. And again, this conversation seems to want to continue and continue, but you have to
It's a starting point.
It's
It's
like
an ignition just to give you the space symbolism.
Yeah.
But you have to bring it to a close, and I want to give you an opportunity to give the final comments in terms, because again, part of the reason why I'm having this conversation is to, as a developing country, we are setting up a space ecosystem to better understand how we can help that grow. And one of the takeaway points that I've taken from Agnes is that we can't work in isolation. We need to have the community. Of course, Ian, you've indicated there is funding that we can tap into if we bring like-minded people. But I wanted to ask you to give us one or two, what are the main things that we need to focus on as we seek to build the space ecosystem? And I start with Agnes as you wrap up.
I usually say it's important to look at stuff holistically. So look at different facets of the ecosystem, the space ecosystem, and look at the person, look at the system where the person is operating in, look at the governance component at the top, and look at the different players alongside the ecosystem that are championing this conversation. And so as you're building this ecosystem, try to address all these components. So the innovators, the researchers within the space ecosystem, how are you addressing their needs to be ready to take up the opportunities that you are preparing, for them? On the other end, how are you preparing the ecosystem out there, the ESOs, to be able to support the space sector, stakeholders, innovators, and researchers? How closely are you working with the existing ESOs that are working within that space? And if there are none, how do you then introduce this within existing? Because you do not want to again start saying we're setting up a specialized, while there are resources already existing, you just need to see how best you collaborate with them. So if it's the ESOs, and if at all it's the funding ecosystem, and how you're introducing the component on the space, you need to have a separate conversation with these people. But even as we are doing all these initiatives around the stakeholders, how are we ensuring we are creating a very enabling environment at government level? So you're gearing up for a very huge lot of innovators and startups coming up, and they will come on you with everything. And at that point, government will not be ready to embrace and work with them because the systems are not ready. So how well do you prepare the systems to be able to address and support the innovators that are coming up? Because they are actually coming up. Okay. So for it to be holistic, you want to look at all these facets. And again, as I said, for the space sector, it will be very advisable to work alongside key. You can now identify the key in the country that are actually also key to government in terms of priorities. Is it industry? Is it agriculture? Is it health? Whatever sector it is, at least pick the three that are key, and there are existing resources. You have to be also strategic as a sector. Because then if there are no non-existent resources, it means that you're going to do a lot of groundwork to get them to come on board. resources in terms of human as well as financial resources. So for me, holistic is very important, ensuring that you're addressing all the key different components within the space ecosystem, and ensure that you are moving all these things in tandem to be able to actually achieve that goal of building that space ecosystem. Thanks.
Thank you for that highlight. Again, I hear a lot of stakeholders, meaning that you have to become very good at choir management. The sopranos, the bass, and all that have to be all blended in so that we have a good song. Ian?
Yeah, and if I was to build on that one, we use the word ecosystem, and I'm looking at doing a bit of a bullshit bingo, and I think it's definitely one of the words that is there on the top list. And I think we need to perhaps more orchestrate, look at what is it. And I'll say, with the risk of being a bit elitish, say it's not everyone. I think we as the ESOs have seen that themes and thematics, they come and go. Funders love then training us all in green or circularity or whatever it is that is a new thing. And a sobering moment will be that we're not all going to do space. We're not all going to do circularity. We're not all going to do. We all talk about specialization, but we've not really found a pathway for this. And I think space is going to be requiring even more specialization than perhaps a lot of the other sectors. And I think that also means that it is not necessarily that everybody has to be in the room. I think we need to find out what's that small room with those who want to put in what it's going to take and who want to build the dedication. And I think also we've not really done that across other themes. And I think maybe it's time to test out what happens if we decide to have a very orchestrated, very systemic, very strategic approach where it is a number of players that are the ones we're building on. We can always invite more people into the room. The trouble is when we build the big room and the room is crowded by a lot of people who are sitting and just listening in, it kind of means that we're not building it out. And I definitely would say we should, I think we should try and do a different approach and say it is a bit of a room that is smaller. We make it move. And because we're few and nimble, we can make it move faster. But it also means there needs to be a dedication from people. Then I want to build it local. We need to really figure out how do we anchor it local? How do we build on that so we're not going to be overtaken? I think this is a theme that even has just as much risk as a lot of others, that it'll be internationals coming in. They will be there. There will be the partners, there'll be the linkages. But the core of it, we need to build local. We need to build it anchored, so it's not going into space, but it is grounded as well here. And we have a capability that we're building. And because tomorrow, when funding is over, what then? Then it is that local anchor that's going to make sure that we're building forward. It is not because there's money, because this is a new hot topic, because that's always going to come and go.
Yeah.
And also, I think what happens often from a funding perspective is when we start having a new theme and we spread the funding thin across a number of organizations, it becomes unsustainable, as opposed to if we said, let's concentrate it among less organizations, that we can start building the specialization. We can start being able to build capabilities that allow us to provide much better support than we're doing when suddenly everything is very thin. And that also means that we're chasing the next thing because there wasn't enough funding to sustain us or to build any of this. And that's really where I think there is a need for us to think differently. And I think space could be one of those opportunities.
You seem to be opening another can of worms, and
Always works.
because I feel like I want to follow up on that conversation, but I have to bring it to a close now.
It's a wormhole. Don't worry.
Thank you for your time, Agnes, and Ian, for Friday afternoon where you could be doing other things, but you decided to share your insights. And I believe this is just the beginning. Again, we're saying this is catalyzing conversations that we should be able to move forward. And again, we look forward to engaging you. Like we said, this is just the beginning of the conversation or the continuation of the conversation. Again, we have a lot of things that we need to. Maybe we are the small number that Ian is calling the strategic team that needs to sit together and help bring that critical path so that we move the conversation forward. Thank you so much. And again, we look forward to engaging in the next episodes. Asanteni sana.
Thank you.